On August 2, 216 BCE, the hot Apulian sun rose over the fields near Cannae. Dust shimmered in the air, stirred by the feet of nearly 150,000 men. Here, in the heart of Italy, Rome and Carthage were about to fight one of the most decisive battles in human history. A battle so brutal, so brilliant, that it would change the way wars were fought forever. The stakes could not have been higher. For nearly 2 years, Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general, had ravaged Italy. He had crossed the Alps with elephants, humiliated Rome at Trebia and Lake Trasimene, and inspired fear in the very heart of the Republic. Rome's honor was on the line, and the Senate resolved to end this threat once and for all. They assembled the largest army the Republic had ever fielded, over 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry. It was a force meant to crush Hannibal once and for all. Hannibal, by contrast, commanded roughly 50,000 men, a patchwork army of Carthaginians, Iberians, Gauls, and Numidian cavalry. He was outnumbered almost 2 to 1, yet Hannibal knew numbers alone do not win wars. Strategy does. And on that summer morning, he would prove it. The armies face off the Roman army, led by consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, marched in massive, dense blocks. Their plan was simple: use their overwhelming manpower to smash through Hannibal's center, crush his army, and end the war in one stroke. Hannibal, however, had devised something Rome had never seen before, a trap disguised as weakness. He placed his light infantry, Iberians and Gauls, in the center, slightly ahead of his main line. Behind them, his stronger African infantry waited on both flanks. His cavalry, including the feared Numidians, stood ready on the wings. As the battle began, dust clouds rose from the plain. War horns blared. The Romans advanced in a massive surge, pushing directly into Hannibal's center. At first, it seemed the Carthaginian lines were buckling. The Gauls and Iberians slowly fell back, bending inward like a bow under strain. The Romans pressed harder, believing victory was at hand. But this was exactly what Hannibal wanted. The trap springs shut as the Romans pushed into the concave center. They found themselves hemmed in. Hannibal's African infantry, fresh and heavily armed, wheeled inward from the flanks. Suddenly, the Romans were no longer attacking a retreating enemy. They were trapped in a tightening pocket. Then came the cavalry. On one wing, Hannibal's Numidian horsemen routed the Roman cavalry with their lightning-fast maneuvers. On the other, Hannibal's heavy cavalry smashed through their Roman counterparts and swept behind the Roman infantry. Now the legions were surrounded on all sides. What followed was slaughter. Packed so tightly they could scarcely swing their swords, the Roman soldiers were crushed together, unable to fight or flee. Carthaginian blades hacked them down without mercy. The screams of the dying mixed with the clash of steel and the cries of victorious Numidians circling like wolves around a trapped herd. By day's end, the Roman army was annihilated. Of the 86,000 men who had marched to Cannae, as many as 50,000 to 60,000 lay dead, their blood soaking the Apulian soil. Another 10,000 were captured. It was one of the greatest massacres in military history. Rome's bloodiest day, the losses at Cannae stunned the ancient world. The Romans had suffered defeats before, but never anything like this. Whole families were left in mourning. So many senators had fallen in the battle that Rome struggled to fill its government seats. Survivors spoke of a field littered with corpses, piled so high they blocked the view of the horizon. And yet, amidst the devastation, Hannibal's victory carried a strange irony. Though he had destroyed Rome's army, he could not march on the city itself. His forces were too exhausted, too far from their supply lines, and without siege equipment. Some of his officers urged him to advance, but Hannibal chose instead to regroup. It was a fateful decision, one that gave Rome precious time to recover. The genius of Hannibal, what made Cannae legendary, was not just the scale of the slaughter, but the brilliance of the tactic Hannibal used, the double envelopment. By allowing his center to give ground while holding strong on the flanks, he lured the Romans deeper and deeper into his trap. Then, with perfect timing, he closed the circle. It was the first time in history such a maneuver had been executed on such a massive scale, and it worked with devastating precision. Military commanders for centuries would study Hannibal's masterpiece. From Frederick the Great to Napoleon, from the U.S. Civil War to modern military academies, Cannae remains a textbook example of tactical genius. Rome refuses to die for Hannibal. Cannae was his greatest triumph, but also the peak of his power. Despite his overwhelming victory, Rome did not surrender. The Republic, bloodied but unbroken, adopted a strategy of attrition. Under leaders like Fabius Maximus, the Romans avoided direct battles, slowly wearing down Hannibal's army until the tide turned. Years later, at Zama in 202 BCE, Hannibal would finally be defeated by Scipio Africanus. Yet Cannae's shadow lingered. It was Rome's bloodiest day, a trauma etched into the Republic's memory. Generals vowed never again to let their armies be trapped as they had been on that terrible field. Legacy of Cannae, more than 2 millennia later, the Battle of Cannae is still remembered as the ultimate lesson in strategy. It showed that intelligence, timing, and cunning could overcome raw numbers. It revealed the terrible price of arrogance and the cost of underestimating an opponent. And above all, it proved the genius of Hannibal Barca, a commander who, with fewer men, carved his name into the annals of history as one of the greatest tacticians the world has ever seen. So when we remember Rome's might, we must also remember its darkest day. At Cannae, the Republic nearly bled to death, and all because of one brilliant tactic that changed the face of warfare forever. And if you want to uncover more stories of epic battles, brilliant generals, and the moments that shaped the ancient world, make sure you subscribe to the Roman Scroll. Because history is more than dates and names. It is the story of humanity's greatest triumphs and its darkest hours.